Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, what Donald Trump's return means for the Middle East.
You know, we all ultimately want one thing. We want peace in the Middle East. We're going to get peace in the Middle East. I think it's going to happen very fast.
What is his vision for the region? And is it a promise or a threat? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. The U.S. election frenzy took center stage this week. But while it was dominating the headlines, things in Gaza, Lebanon, and Israel continue to escalate.
Well, Israel's parliament has voted to approve a bill that would designate the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees as a terrorist organization. The bill also calls for a complete severing of ties from UNRWA.
More large crowds left Beit Lahia in the north after the latest Israeli threats to clear out. This is what ethnic cleansing looks like.
The latest area of Lebanon to come under Israeli attacks is one of the oldest and most historic in the country. Baalbek is known to be a stronghold of Hezbollah.
Breaking news coming out of Israel, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dismissed his Defense Minister Yoav Gallant.
My guest today has been keeping an eye on all of those events as the news in the U.S. unfolded.
I'm Daniel Levy. I head up the U.S. Middle East Project and previously was a negotiator for Israel in peace talks with the Palestinians under Prime Ministers Rabin and Barak.
Daniel, welcome back to The Take. It's always good to have you. The Israeli military announced this week that they are getting closer to a complete evacuation of northern Gaza. Now, Israeli human rights group B'Tselem and others have called what Israel is doing there ethnic cleansing. Meanwhile, efforts to reach a ceasefire have not led anywhere yet. So you mentioned you're a former negotiator. Where do you see things headed given this landscape?
This is a militarily, ideologically driven mission that we are in. There was not an intention for there to be a transition to politics, to negotiations, to day after plans, to how do we transition this into an opportunity for a better tomorrow for the Palestinians. We are deep in the how do we make tomorrow as miserable as today, and how do we make the possibility of restoring Palestinian life in those areas as unlikely as possible. And the level of destruction doesn't make sense unless one acknowledges that that's what's going on here.
And then what about that ever-elusive ceasefire deal? Are we any closer?
No. You could make the case that, the more Israel achieves its war aims, surely there comes a point at which it's okay. You can call a ceasefire now. There is something to that, but, and the but really matters here. First of all, the resistance is not defeated. And if the premise is that there is going to be a capitulation and that this will be exclusively a victor's diktat, then that is not something that gets achieved in conflicts of this nature when you are fighting against a people, not just an armed resistance movement, because that movement is based in its people. So you could say, well, Israel realizes that when Netanyahu says total victory, he doesn't mean total. Presumably, he just means we got to get a good part of this job done, and then there can be a reasonable deal. There's nothing to suggest that, because the Israeli side has set out its stall that it intends to stay militarily in Gaza. The debate inside the Israeli government isn't, are we going to stay or are we going to go? It's, are we going to stay and are we going to add civilian settlements back in Gaza or not?
So I want to talk about some of the news we saw just in recent days. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, on Tuesday. The two weren't agreeing on a whole host of issues, including on handling the war. His replacement is Israel Katz, a close loyalist. So based on what people have been telling you, your sources inside of Israel, what is going on in Netanyahu's camp right now?
Netanyahu feels he is on the ascendancy. He wouldn't have done this otherwise. It wasn't like Gallant posed an imminent threat to him. Let's also be very clear. Gallant is the war minister during a genocide. This is not, he is the good guy, and what a shame we have to let go of him. It's Netanyahu and Gallant, both of whom have requests for arrest warrants from the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court for war crimes hanging over their heads, those requests. Gallant, I think, represented an important wing of the security establishment who feel that the law of diminishing returns is in effect when it comes to Israel refusing to enter into a serious negotiation and continuing the operations both in Lebanon and in Gaza. Israel does not have an endless supply of reservists. So there are a number of reasons. I perhaps shouldn't list them all. But why Gallant and the security establishment think it's a good idea to bed down into a deal-making space. There is a degree of exhaustion. Gallant wanted to handle the issue of enlisting a certain segment of the Israeli Jewish population, the ultra-Orthodox. Right. He was a bit of an obstacle for Netanyahu. Those guys are his coalition allies. He needs to make an arrangement that they're comfortable with. So that was a tension between them as well. Netanyahu has been waiting for this moment. It seems that the opportunity, backdrop of the US election, backdrop of the other things that have been going on, this was a moment he could do it. He would like to continue to promote people closer to his ideological part of the spectrum, the hard nationalist right. There is a whole new national security framing in Israel, which sees in settling, which sees in taking land, which sees in expansionism, not only an ideological religious mission, but also it's trying to make the case that this is what best serves our security. He wants more of those folks going up the ranks, because what we're seeing in Israel is a wholesale replacing of the elite. And again, one has to caveat it and say we're not replacing an elite which was warmly embracing the idea of Palestinian rights with an elite.
Right. It wasn't a group of doves.
It wasn't, one Israeli friend put it like this to me: you're replacing the apartheidists with the genocidists. Neither sound like warm and fuzzy people to be spending time with, but one sound like people who you really don't want in positions of power.
Interesting. Well, to sum that up then, materially, what will this change mean for Gaza?
I think it's more of the same. I don't think Gallant went out on a limb to push through the hostage deal, a ceasefire deal. He never threatened to resign off the back of that.
Right.
It wasn't like Gallant was saying, I don't want to end up in The Hague. This is an illegal order, what we're doing in northern Gaza. He gave the orders. Gallant's the defense minister under whom the former deputy national security advisor, Eran Etzion, goes out on Twitter and says, these orders, what you are being asked to do in Gaza, in the north, constitute war crimes. And he calls on soldiers not to fulfill these illegal orders. So I don't think that is the dynamic around which things might shift in Gaza.
More with Daniel Levy after the break. Well, Daniel, I want to broaden this out. You touched on this earlier, the landscape of the U.S. election allowing Netanyahu time to do what he wants to do. You've been following the U.S. election. Donald Trump won a second term in the White House. Reactions are pouring in worldwide. Some Palestinians are expressing fear of what's coming ahead.
Don't forget that he is the first one who confessed with Jerusalem as a capital for the Israeli, and he transferred the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
The American people, especially the American presidents, especially Donald Trump, is not going to do the big difference for the Palestinian, except if he wants peace, wants the right of peace, the right of education, the right of health that all the people around the world are having. He wants the Palestinian, the Gazans, to have it too.
He promised the Muslim people in America to stop the war in Gaza. We hope that.
The leaders of Hamas and the Palestinian Authority have urged Trump to act for peace. And Trump has promised to bring a lasting peace, but he's also promised during his presidential campaign to give Israel all the support it needs. What do we know about what a second Trump term could bring?
Look, a decent policy towards Palestinians and the Middle East, or even just stop arming, aiding and abetting a genocide, weren't on the ballot in terms of the competitive presidential election race.
Mm-hmm.
So let's focus on Trump. Trump is a known quantity. Okay? We have 4 years lived experience of a Trump administration when it comes to this issue. So, yes, he's unpredictable. There is going to be more of a contestation, one imagines, between a wing of the administration that is all in for a continuation of an assertive attempt to regain American primacy, unipolarity, be the hard ass, versus a wing that says that's not what best serves America and our economy and calls for restraint. We don't want to get into foreign entanglements. Trump didn't do wars directly, so to speak, in his first term. However, when you bring that reality and you put it through the aperture, you put it through the lens of Middle East, Trump's the guy in his first term who moved the embassy of the US in Israel to Jerusalem, closed the East Jerusalem consulate to the Palestinians, closed the PLO mission in Washington, D.C., recognized against international law Israeli sovereignty on the Golan Heights. He's the guy who brings forward these normalization accords designed to marginalize the Palestinians and to send the signal to Israel, no matter how extreme you are, I'm going to get a Pax Americana with you in a hegemonic place in this region. That was the handmaiden to Israeli extremism. He embeds the illegal Israeli settlements in unprecedented ways in bilateral treaties between the US and Israel, and the list could go on. So yes, expect the policy on the Middle East to not improve, perhaps be worse. Biden never rolled back those Trump things, by the way. Expect domestically this crackdown that has advanced as we've seen people wanting to protest at the grotesque nature of American abetting and aiding of what is going on. We've seen that crackdown. It is likely to intensify. Spurious accusations of anti-Semitism are likely to be further weaponized. Criminalization of dissent on this issue is likely to intensify. And what does it tell us? America is not going to lead the path to a better Middle East. We have to look elsewhere.
How do we merge Trump's vision for this region, in which you don't believe the U.S. has a real role here or an adequate role? How do we merge that with who does?
So, look, the U.S. is going to be around. The U.S. isn't going to skulk off. And there are very big interests in this region as the sovereign wealth funds of the especially the oil-rich states go bigger and bigger. That is something that in this multipolar world order, America will want to keep and drag further into its orbit. But some will say, well, we need to have a strategy that can embarrass, if necessary, some Arab state actors. Some will embrace, and then you can work those outer circles. At the moment, in many ways, the outer circles of the global south are doing some of the heavy lifting. But we need the onion to look the other way, so to speak.
Right. Well, in talking about those Arab state actors very briefly, what role do you see Saudi Arabia playing in this? Because, of course, we know that Trump in his last term had come up with this so-called the Abraham Accords. You touched on them. What do you see that relationship looking like?
The Gulf has a different profile today, geopolitically, geoeconomically, to where we were when Trump came into power the first time. It's only more important today. We just saw the expansion of the BRICS in the Russian-hosted meeting of the BRICS in Kazan. You saw that the BRICS expanded to include countries in the region. The Saudis were there, the Emiratis were there, the Turks were there, the Egyptians were there. And now I think there's a question to Saudi. And the question to Saudi is, you have actually a place here from a position of relative power. Do you want to use it in ways that, yes, have to serve the state of Saudi Arabia and its interests? But you know where your people are when it comes to what is happening to the Palestinians. You know the relevance of that cause. You know, as the custodian of the two holy mosques, that Al-Aqsa is not something you can ignore. You're not here from a position of weakness. I think the expectation is that just as was attempted under Biden, one could sell this off relative, give us a few words on Palestine and it will be enough. But the possibility is that this could be part not of the continuation of an Abraham Accord exercise in marginalizing, suffocating the Palestinians and their cause, but in bringing it forward. But I don't think anyone can lead on that until Palestinians bring their politics together and show the way, which isn't me saying, look, there are no Palestinians out there. Quite the reverse. You have amazing people, amazing ideas, amazing resilience, amazing creativity. Channel it, bring it together in a political movement. A strange thing for me to be saying, perhaps, but it's going to be really important in the coming years.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, I want to end on something more concrete, and those are the words that Trump has said about Gaza. In an interview last month, Trump raved about the weather in Gaza and said it could be better than Monaco as a tourist destination. He talked about what he considered real estate prospects there.
It could be better than Monaco. It has the best location in the Middle East, the best water, the best everything. It's got.
These are comments that echo those of his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who was also his foreign policy advisor and who once described Gaza as a waterfront property that could be very valuable, and said Israel should bulldoze an area of the Negev desert and move Palestinians there. So these are the concrete things that have come out of the Trump camp. With Trump returning to power, should we expect those words to materialize?
The tiniest little part of me would kind of want to see Kushner world and settler Israeli world duke it out for who's going to build in Gaza. But I'll park that because that was said tongue in cheek about something that one can't joke about because of what's going on there. Look, there are plans and there is a reality where Israeli politics is primed. Not everyone, but Israeli politics is primed for a second major Nakba. It's in motion at the moment in North Gaza. A huge displacement of Palestinians. That is not the fevered imaginings. That is conferences that are being held by Israeli government ministers, by Likud lawmakers, also from Netanyahu's party, and there are people looking at the financing and other things of that.
Thousands gather to call for illegal Israeli settlements to be rebuilt in Gaza and for Palestinians to be expelled from their homes.
It looks like an emirate city with high-rise buildings and electric vehicles being developed. I do not think that this is where we are going. I have seen the horrific circumstances under which Palestinians are living, and yet they cling to that land.
Right.
And eventually, and this may be the kind of thing that brings about this eventually, overreach will generate again a counter-reaction, which will not work out well for those who are on the wrong side of history, of legality, of morality on these questions. And that may seem like a leap of faith, Pollyannish thing to say against the backdrop of what we're seeing. But I do think that from a realist perspective, Israel will not be able to get away with this. Israel is surrounded by people who it is making extremely angry. And that is not sustainable.
And that's The Take. What do you think of Donald Trump's return to the White House? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to catch more episodes like this, make sure you're following our YouTube playlists. That's where you'll find all of our recent content updated regularly so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button so you stay in the loop with all things Al Jazeera English. See you tomorrow.